Hey, everybody. Welcome to Deviant, where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what people are capable of. And today, we're actually not going to be doing as much of the chasing as much as we are going to talk a little bit about the show and a number of different things. I am Andrew Iden.
And I'm Dan Szematowicz.
And we're coming to you today in a little bit more of a chatty format. Right, Dan?
Oh, am I supposed to chat here? Chat. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that we want to talk about. And, we're almost a year into the show now. And we wanted to spend some time, tell you guys, how we do the show. And that's what today's about. And also, we want to hear from you. And you have been talking to us. You've been leaving us lots of great comment and feedback. Sometimes about the stories, but sometimes it's more about the show in general. And we'd like to talk about some of that today.
Where do you think we should start?
Let's start with how we actually make the show. And I think that all starts with how do we choose the stories that we choose? And I think for me, the big main thing is we pick stories that have something to say. We're never out to just do a story that's, this happened, the end, right? Like we want to find a story that has a takeaway, that has a point.
Or, in the case of the story we did last week about Corey Barron, a case that could benefit from a wider audience.
Yeah.
Knowing the details that we know that can help maybe tie up loose ends. What can help bring the thing to a close?
There should be a point to doing the story, right? And that's sort of the number one thing. Like when we did our look at incels a few months ago, right? That's very relevant in today's, what's happening today in today's culture, the manosphere, all that stuff, right? Like this is something that is active and alive and, it's misunderstood. And, hopefully those kinds of stories, we're all learning new things about the society around us.
Right. And so we're constantly kind of kicking around different show story ideas with, Clark is the third member of our operation. And we are always tearing up the text chain and the discussion of what's going to make a good story, right? And the other thing that you have to consider is are there enough voices on this story available to talk about the points that need to be talked about? And so a lot of people may be familiar with the phrase booking, which is getting people to sit down and have a conversation with you. We can't really do a story unless people are going to want to talk to us about it, right? Because I think that we all made the decision early on. What we didn't want to do was just research a story, read some Wikipedia stuff about it, and then just kind of go from there. That's not really the way we wanted to operate. We wanted to do it through the voices of the men and women who lived through whatever that story was.
And that's not always just talking to them in interviews and using that sound like we do. It's what's out there in the archive. Is there interrogation tape? Are there documents that we can bring to life? What's the stuff that allows us to add a lot of meat to the bone of these stories? Yeah. So it's not just doing interviews. It's finding the stuff that really brings these stories to life and ideally, puts you as close to experiencing it as possible.
Do you know about the document hunt, Dan?
Well, hats tip to Andrew. Nobody wants this show to be us saying nice things about each other for a half hour and how great we think each other are. And I do think you're great, but you are a master of document searching, right? Andrew has a skill that I don't have, and that's getting people to give him things, document-wise, sound-wise, video-wise.
Well, I don't know if it's, I appreciate the kind words. I don't know if I would say I'm a master, but the key is, and I was actually having a conversation with somebody about this recently, public records are just that. They are public records, and there's something that anyone can get a copy of. You just have to know who to ask and where to go to ask and how to ask. And once you do it, it's generally sort of a formalized process. There are varying levels of what different agencies will do and the ways that they will cooperate with you. Like you said, obviously, we want the voices that are going to, articulate the story. But especially with some older cases, so much of the stuff that you're going to get has to come from the narratives that are put together by police. And all of that stuff, and this is not news to anyone, all of that stuff is put down on paper. Mm-hmm. There is more paperwork in the legal and criminal investigation world than anywhere I can think of. And you generally can get copies of that if you know what to ask and who to ask. And so sometimes You go to an organization and you say, look, I would like everything there is to be had on this case. And they might send you back one document that has like, you know, a list of the detectives that worked on it. Other places might come back to you and say, here's a whole box of content. Here's some audio, here's some video, here's some photographs, here's 2,000 pages of documents. And so it sort of can become, you know, you may think you have the story through the voices of the people that you've booked, but once you get into the documents and the paperwork, that's where some of that stuff really comes to light. And I think one of the key components of, like, when we did the Israel Keys story, right, the first series that we did, a lot of that was from documents. And if you remember, Dan, like, we sat on a Google call like for 3 days sifting through a PDF together.
That was fun. Yep. He's not exaggerating. It was 3 days of going through a few thousand documents.
Hey, wait, did you see that on page 29? Like a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
set 29, page 47.
It was useful. Right. Like, we learned new things, and it allowed us to ask new questions. So, you know, if you're really into true crime, and I assume if you're listening to this, you are, right? And you want to do some web sleuthing, and you want to do some explorations and investigating on your own, it is your right as a private citizen to request these things. You just got to know how to play the game.
And you got to know how to navigate the tedious nature.
Yes.
That is an 800 megabyte PDF file. Do you know how many pages that is?
I do. I see them. So once we have all that stuff, once we have our interviews and our documents and our sound, then it's time to make the show itself. And we organize all that stuff into something that makes sense as a story, right? A narrative arc. Then we do the writing. And I think good podcast writing, and, you know, if you're looking to do narrative podcasts, this would be my advice, is to let the sound lead, right? The show should be about the sound, not about you. I mean, it's okay to be about you, but let the sound be the star. And so we always look at the way we write the show as the words we write and the things we say. That's the connective tissue that gets you from sound bite to sound bite, right? And it should all feel like it flows as a natural whole. And then after that's done, then we record it, we put it together, we make it sound nice, we use all the technology to clean up sound where we can, because sometimes a lot of that sound is rough. And another rule of when you're working with audio is, and this is a good old engineering rule, the quality of input determines the quality of your output. So if the sound you're using at the source isn't that good, there's only so much you could do with it. But there are a lot of tools out there that lets us make it sound better. And, you know, we try to do that.
Thinking back to the stories we've done, is there anything that kind of jumps out at you?
As far as like
just compelling sound or sound that you're like, oh man.
Yeah. Israel Keys, where we started, the way he just describes his crimes and the interrogation tape we had, that was super intense.
I had all of the guns ready to go, and I had on, actually I think it was that same jacket that you found me with, that rain jacket. And I started walking around town at about 8 or 9 o'clock after it had got dark. I was looking for someone to carjack. It was raining really hard that night. So I had my backpack with me. It had a bunch of stuff in it, like cable ties and duct tape, and went across the road from the hotel and had an apartment complex there staked out, and I was waiting for someone to come in alone. And I was also looking for someone who was coming in a decent car that was fairly generic, because my thought was the next day after I got done with whoever I took, I was going to take their car, and I had 3 banks staked out in different towns.
How about you?
There's one that jumps out at me from the Sowell story that we did, and that is the interrogation tape. When Detective Melvin Smith, if you recall, was banging the table.
Yes, the yelly one. Yeah.
Trying to get Anthony Sowell to cough up the details. I mean, he was literally banging the table and screaming at him. And I was like, this isn't something you hear very often.
You know you killed him, but you can't remember how you killed him.
I don't know.
You punished somebody's daughters.
6 daughters.
And now you're not willing, because your ass trying to save your ass that you don't even want to do the right thing. Okay. The only right thing you can motherfucking do, you don't want to do it. You ain't doing shit. The only goddamn right thing you can do. The only fucking right thing you can do, and you don't want to do shit. That's bad, man. That's fucked up. You tell me you a man?
I'm done. I don't know.
You should have told me that long goddamn time ago instead of running me up and down the motherfucking street.
It's also a great example of tough audio to clean up.
Yes. So one of the other things we wanted to talk about was sort of a zooming out a bit on what we just talked about, which is the process. And part of that requires, especially considering the stories that we're telling, there is a level of responsibility and sensitivity that we have to manage when we're making decisions editorially, right?
Let's talk about true crime. Yeah.
The way we're writing about the details of what happens, because in order to understand what happened or how or why something happened, sometimes you have to delve into the things that are just unspeakable.
You need to figure out how to speak the unspeakable, right? And in true crime, different people, I think it's fair to say, have different philosophies about that.
Yeah. And I would think, and I would hope, that people who have listened to the show that we have been making for the last year have heard and understood where we made those decisions from a responsible standpoint. And I actually think about the Israel Keys story, man. Some of those things were so horrible. And I remember saying, we do not need to go any further than this.
Yeah, we had some pretty intense discussions about that. And we got comments after Israel Keys came out that when we were describing certain crimes or playing tape of Israel Keys confessing to, how he sexually assaulted and murdered, kidnapped, and did all these horrible things to people, we stopped the tape at a point where it was getting really graphic. And to us, it would cross the line of exploitation to play that sound. Andrew and I had some spirited discussions on where that line was. I think Andrew used the metaphor. We want to walk people up to the door of this, but not walk all the way into the room. And we wanted to give people a sense of the horror of these deeds from the mouth of the person who committed them. We didn't want to glorify this person, which is what we feel like we'd be doing by proxy, and also re-victimizing people who may be relatives of these folks or who survived these assaults.
And, there's probably somebody that's listening. It's like, well, if you didn't want to glorify him, but you spent 6 or 7 episodes talking about it. And my response to that is, you are correct in that we did spend that time talking about them.
Yep.
But the goal was not to glorify. The goal was to try to understand or glean some sort of value in what the thinking or what the psychology is behind someone like that. And I think Mary Ellen O'Toole was pretty good at sort of nailing that down for us.
Yeah, she was the FBI profiler we talked to.
Yeah, because, there's value in trying to learn the psychology of people that operate that way. And that's obviously
sort of and Keys is also an open and active investigation. And by virtue of the way he operated, anybody from across the country could have something to contribute to that investigation.
Yeah, there's always these sort of things that you have to consider. And when you're talking to victims who've been through these horrific things and making sure that they are comfortable and feel they're in a place in an environment where they can talk about this with some candor, but not suffer the trauma again. So it's a difficult balance. And I hope that people that listen to the stories that we do hear that in the way we write and produce them.
Here's another tip if you're looking to get into true crime podcasting. Talking to the families of victims or victims themselves requires a very delicate touch, right? I think the best way to handle those conversations is to give as much space as you can for the person you're talking to give you their story in their own way, in their own time. You sort of have to meet them where they are, right? And that's going to be different for every person. You're asking them, and they've agreed to do their best to relive probably the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them or ever will happen to them, or the most traumatic thing that has happened to or will ever happen to someone that they love. So we don't take the approach of bombarding people with questions or asking things like, what could you have done differently? Like those things are occurring to them. Trust me, right? You just need to be their guide, sort of like you're a yoga instructor, right? You're just helping people through the process, helping them move from movement to movement without being too intrusive.
If you're talking to someone about something like that, that is that sensitive, then you need to, however long you speak to them about it, for in an interview setting, you need to have spoken to them 2 or 3 times as long prior to doing any interview.
Yes,
and just
the
on the
pre-interview
phone,
is such a key process. Yeah.
Well, and especially in this space, like the pre-interview is key, is because the first thing you need to do is get a gauge of, are they comfortable talking? If they're comfortable talking, how comfortable are they talking? What is it they want to talk about? Or, meet them halfway. What do they want to, like, you're right. It's such a delicate balance.
And just to add another layer to that, it's not just, are they comfortable talking? Are they comfortable talking to you? So you need to, spend that time to build that rapport with them.
There's a very, very fine line that you have to walk when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. That is, without question, the number one consideration that I think we have when we sit down to figure out what story we're going to do, how we're going to do it.
Yeah. In the realm of true crime in general, thinking about where we fit, a lot of, and I think this is a fair assessment, a lot of true crime shows out there don't think about that stuff, right? Yeah. It's entertainment first, without considering the feelings of the victims, without considering how this may impact people, thinking about what these stories mean to people's lives and the full ramification of what the people that we're talking about are doing. In some cases, when it's an active case or their case hasn't been adjudicated, the person's still going through the court process, not affording that person the presumption of innocence.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad in this field. There's a lot of bad acting in this field. I'm not afraid to say it.
You mentioned something that made me think of an instance. I had an interview with a woman. This has been a couple of years ago. And I think you know this story. I've told you before. But she had something horrific happen to her. Her children had been killed by their father. And she and I spent for an hour and a half talking about it. And she kind of walked me through everything. And she said to me, we were sort of talking after the fact about, I was thanking her for her time. And she said, Andrew, the thing that I don't think you and other people that work in this universe realize is that, like, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you about this, for the sake of awareness and sort of all the things. Like, happy is not the right word. She's willing to do it, right? Mm-hmm. But she said, what you need to understand is that, like, you're going to go about the rest of your life, but, like, I need a day and a half at least to recover from going through all of this again. Like, it just sort of, like, drains you sort of emotionally and physically. And she's like, I'll talk about my children because they are the light of my life. But, like, you will go and continue with your day, but I'm going to have another 2 days of just being, like,
We haven't done it on our show, but previously we worked together telling the story of the Delphi murders. And I think about Mike and Becky Patty, who Libby German's one of the victims' grandparents. And they've been out there for years telling the story of what happened that day from their perspective over and over and over and over to every outlet that would listen to them. They relived that trauma so many times, all in the hope of catching the person or people who did it. And I just can't imagine reliving that over and over and over again. And we talked to them and they told us the story multiple times too. And every time you sit there and you look at them, you could see the pain. They don't get used to it. It's just incredible to see how some of the folks who have to experience these things bear up or deal with it or find their ways to communicate what they experienced. So as we mentioned earlier, we get a lot of feedback on the shows that we do.
I made a deal with you, Dan.
Yeah.
I told you, I said, look, if we're going to do feedback on today's show, as sort of a status check, that for every positive comment, we're also going to add in a negative or critical comment.
A not so positive comment.
Yeah. I mean, I can take it.
You're better at taking it than I am.
So we have our bucket of feedback here.
Yes.
Where would you like to start?
Let's start positive. We always want to start positive, right? Like, always deliver the good news before you deliver the bad news.
Right. What is it they call that? A good news sandwich where it's like good news, bad news, good news?
Yeah. So we're going to have like a good news, bad news quadruple decker sandwiches. So Murmur81 on Apple Podcasts says, excellent research along with excellent production. Hey, I like this one.
Yeah, I'll take it. High five.
Yeah. You've heard how that comes about. We just told you about all that, and it's nice to see that is appreciated.
Okay, I'm going to pull from the bucket, and I'm going to go with Terry from Apple Podcasts. He said this in November. You ready for this?
Yeah.
This used to be the best podcast. Now it's just two dudes that don't even seem to like each other, just talking for the sake of sponsorship.
Yeah.
It's not even true crime stories anymore. Okay, I'd like to address this on a couple different levels. First of all, not even true crime stories anymore. That's wholly inaccurate. Sure, our Friday show, we've done some stuff that's not like in the traditional true crime sense, but I would still say that 95% of the content we produce is in the true crime universe. The other thing is he said, now it's just two dudes that don't even seem to like each other. First of all, I would say, Dan, that you and I have worked together long enough that if we didn't like each other, we wouldn't have been working together this long.
That's very true. Yeah.
And B, there are instances where you and I are working on something together and you may not be my biggest fan and vice versa, because we get like, this is how, two people working closely together on something, that's how it works. You fuss, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't worry though. Dad and Dad love each other very much. We really enjoy working with each other.
Each other.
And off air, if you will, when we're not working on the show, we're
talk
friends.
about a lot
we
of
send each
other
other all the
things.
time. Yeah, absolutely.
My final point from Terry's note. They're just talking for the sake of sponsorship. I would actually say Terry is half true and half right on this, because in order to continue producing the show, we need to generate revenue. Revenue comes from sponsors. Sponsors want us to talk about whatever it is that is the sponsor of the show. So there are indeed instances where we are talking for the sake of sponsorship.
Yes. I mean, when we're reading ads, and we appreciate all our sponsors, we appreciate all our ads. Like every ad that we do, it's a product that we actually use or, have an affinity for. But we got to pay the bills, baby.
Yes. Okay, Dan, you go. You have one.
I like being the positive guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Deviant, this is from Spotify. And by the way, you can leave comments on Spotify podcasts now, and we can reply.
We get a lot of engagement on Spotify, by the way.
Yeah. So come engage with us. Deviant has become one of my don't miss podcasts. Great storytelling and interviewing. Top tier. Yeah.
I'll take it.
Thank you very much.
There's not a lot to say about the positive ones. We take them and move on, right?
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate your positive feedback. But then there's other comments.
So this is from Colette on Apple Podcasts. He says, I'm not sure why people keep repeating the same story over and over. We have all heard this story so many times, and this podcast adds no new info to the already overdone story of Israel Keys. Okay, couple things I'd like to address. First of all,
gather around, step up.
When you say we have all heard this story many times, that is you. You have heard this story many, many times. I presume you are already at the party. We oftentimes are doing stories for people who have not arrived at the party yet.
When we were approaching Israel Keys, when we were starting Israel Keys, I was surprised by how many people had never heard of him. Right?
Correct.
We've been in true crime long enough, Israel Keys, but it's interesting stuff. And in this story, we got a whole bunch of stuff that was not out there yet. And
yes. Well, his note that says, I'm not so sure why people keep repeating the same story over and over. One of the first things we talk about when we try to pick a story is, has this story been done? That's not a blanket, like, if it's been done, we're not going to do it.
I think another part of has it been done? If the answer is yes, then our question is, what can we add to it? What can we bring that's new to it, right?
Right. Coe could make the same argument about JonBenet Ramsey, about O.J. Simpson, about Waco, about Ruby Ridge, about Oklahoma City, about the DC Sniper, about Casey Anthony. Like, you could go on and on about cases that live almost infinitely in kind of the media, universe.
So in the case of Israel Keys, staying on that example, we were able to talk to people who haven't talked before on Israel Keys. We were able to talk to some of the people that he grew up with in the Colville area of Washington. I think is the first time the FBI has talked to a podcast. They've talked to television before, but I think it's the first time the FBI was recorded on a podcast. So that's one of those, what can we bring to that's new? And also, we found it really interesting. We found this story really interesting. And Andrew and I had actually been talking for years about we'd love to do an Israel Keys exploration.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. It's like, yeah, maybe it's been told, but also what are stories that we find interesting that we want to tell? And hopefully that interest in this sort of intense curiosity about a story comes out in the way that we tell it.
So thank you, Co, for your comment. We appreciate you listening.
Thank you.
As always.
Yes.
Going to the positive.
From Wit on Apple Podcasts, you guys haven't figured out. Compelling and so easy to follow. Your research is phenomenal, and I can't wait for more. Thank you, Wit. We appreciate it. That positivity has steeled me for the next one.
Here's the perfect pair of comments to end on. A positive comment from Apple Podcasts. Very well done. My favorite is off script.
Ooh.
A week later from Apple Podcasts. 5-star rating, but the off script episodes need to stop.
Oh.
I think there's no better way to end this segment of this is kind of the feedback you get, right?
Sure, yeah. This is the podcast space. All we can do and all we aim to do is tell stories the best way that we can, the best way we know how, and try to give you the best experience possible. For a lot of you, we seem to be hitting that. For some people, we don't. And that's okay. Our show's not and never will be for everybody. But we appreciate you listening. We do appreciate your feedback. And we read it all. And, we take it in. And, sometimes we do make adjustments. We're not perfect. We don't pretend to be. And I think the important thing is to always be learning, to always be growing. And your feedback is a part of that for me.
Yes. We've talked before about don't get caught up in the comments, but sometimes it's a good way to get some anecdotal evidence on what is working or what isn't working. So thank you so much for the feedback. We really appreciate it. And
positive, not so positive. We appreciate it. We want it all. We read it all.
We've been rolling for a while here, Dan. So it's probably about time we get out of here.
Yes.
This was fun to kind of flip on the mics and have a conversation about some of this stuff. We will probably do it later on down the line.
Yeah.
But until then, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. Deviant is executive produced by the aforementioned Clark Goldband. He's also our story editor. Show is written and produced by me and Andrew Iden. Although there wasn't much writing today, it was just us talking, which I suppose is its own form of writing. Anyway, original scoring comes from our good friend Shuvo Sir. Marketing, production, and distribution support come from our friends at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.
A live read credit. Well done.
Thank you.